So without further ado, I'm going to ask each of my panelists to please introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about you, a little bit about your roles, and a little bit about your companies.
Hello, my name is Jeremy Round. I work at Yahoo. I am the director of People Team Headquarters, which basically means I'm sort of the COO to our HR organization. Yahoo is 10,000 and shrinking. We have an HR team of about 150 full-time and about 50 to 60 contractors. I've been at Yahoo for about 4.5 years, 2 of which I've spent in the HR function. My background is actually, I have an MBA. I'm more of sort of a ops and strategy guy. And when our organization started taking more of a turn towards having engineers and product managers in business roles, I went to the head of HR and said, "Why are you doing that?" And she said, "Well, we have various reasons, but would you like to join my team?" And I said, "Why not?" So 2 years later, I've gotten a lot of different exposure to the HR function, but very much from sort of the MBA perspective.
Hello, I'm Tim Gates. I'm with Nestle USA. It's a division of Nestle which turns 150 this year, so we're kind of a young company. A little bit small. We have 339,000 employees globally. We're 197 countries. If you look at us, we in the US have about 44,000 employees, and we're really focused on nutrition, health, and wellness. So we're the largest, right now, the world's largest food and beverage company. Once the InBev deal goes through with SAB Miller, they might be slightly larger than us, but a small little company. I've been there 17% of Nestle's history, so 26 years, if you do the math. I'm that guy that graduated in 1990 with a marketing degree. So I started in a management development program in sales. I proceeded to move into a sales training role. And then they asked me, "What do you want to do next?" I said, "I want to work internationally." So they sent me over to Switzerland, and I was a IT project leader building a factory information system. And then I came back and they said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "How about marketing?" So I was the marketing manager of our roast and ground coffee before we sold that business. And then I had to kind of make a choice. Do I go back to sales? Do I stay in marketing? Or do I continue on in HR? And I decided to stay in the OD space. So for the next 10 years, I traveled around doing a lot of our management development, leader development, managed a training center we had up in Seattle that was actually an operating dairy. So I operated Nestle's last dairy in the US. And then when we sold that, I had to move back to LA, and I've continued on since then, primarily in our talent space, leading all of our, whether it be recruiting, talent management, L&OD. And then a few years later, they asked if I wanted to try the generalist role. So no preparation for that, but went up to San Francisco area and ran our ice cream division, HR. For that, it's dryers. You might have had some of our products, or Skinny Cow, or Haagen-Dazs, not to plug too many products. Helped integrate that business into Nestle USA because it was an acquisition, and then landed myself here where my responsibilities today is I manage HR for all of our factories across the US. So we have 23 factories, 14,000 employees, and it's an absolute blast. So.
Well, I'm Bethany Ellis. I work for Boingo Wireless, and your company is turning 150. Ours just turned 15, so we're a little bit younger. Most of you, if you know us because of airports, so we provide Wi-Fi services in airports, but we're also in places where you don't probably notice us as much, in particularly military bases, so that's been a big growth business for us. And we are 300 employees. I've been there about 2.5 years, and we grew from 190 to the 300 in just the past 2 years, so we've seen some growth as well.
Great. So it's interesting. So the topic tonight is engagement. It's one of those topics, it's like mom and apple pie. You know, everybody's for engagement. So let's start a little bit with the basics. And Bethany, I want to pick on you a little bit. I mean, how do you think about engagement? How do you define engagement? What does it mean to you, and how does that translate into your work?
So I think of it in terms of what kind of relationships are we building within our organization, predominantly between people. We believe that engagement is very much about open and two-way conversations. And I see engagement is really when we work together as teams versus as individuals. And it's a big cultural focus for us at our company.
So, Tim, what do you think? How do you think about it? How do you define it?
Totally agree. We kind of, similarly for us, it's all about establishing that rapport between two employees, and that's how we really measure it. And for us, it's kind of on 3 dimensions. It's the motivational, what does it take to get somebody to go above and beyond? On the rational, it's, do I identify with the company and the values of that company? And then on the emotional, it's do I have pride in the company? And that's established on a one-to-one relationship. So I love that comment.
Well, and it's interesting too. We think about some of the stuff you're just talking about, like pride in the company and the connection to the company. And sometimes we see a counterbalance where we actually see folks who maybe are struggling with those things, but actually feel really engaged to resolve them. And so that's something that we struggle with or debate when we do engagement surveys, and we're looking at various questions that use as sort of a proxy, because how do you measure somebody's emotional connection to their work other than to ask some of these questions and sort of measure their outputs. And so those are some of the pitfalls that we struggle with a little bit, because you need to sort of draw a line in the sand and measure over time how you're doing against those things. So just, I think we all would agree on these things. It's just one of the challenges as well.
Mm. So it sounds like with Edge and starting to define it and creating the acronym, we're starting to get the program side, the programmatic side of, okay, I can define engagement. We'll talk in a bit about how to measure it, but how do you think about programs that develop and enable engagement?
I think historically at Yahoo, we've been very tops down, HR providing, CEO providing, and we have wanted to take a sort of swift right turn from that. Mm-hmm. We have a leadership layer that in many ways doesn't necessarily feel ownership. And so we see it in HR as our responsibility to activate that group. Mm-hmm. A, to scale engagement, and B, for them to really own the answers, because ultimately we're not out in the trenches. We don't sort of know and see what our employees are dealing with. 90% of our HR team is in Sunnyvale, but only 52% of our company is in Sunnyvale, right? So we're sort of disconnected in terms of our resourcing in that way. We're also, I know that you guys would be jealous to have a 150-person team, but that's actually pretty small for our headcount, right? And so what we need to do is scale the way we engage our employees, and we need that really to be owned by, that VP and director layer. And so what we've been doing a lot of is having sort of these task forces to revisit, iterate, or create anew various engagement programs, whether it be things like performance management that are just sort of tied into our DNA, or just rethinking like, how do we articulate our culture and missions so that we feel like we're all on the same page and we can say, what is Yahoo? We're putting a man on the moon, right? We don't have that sort of statement at the employee level, and that creates different employee experiences by location, by office, by group, et cetera. So we're really trying to figure out how to, I heard how you did the unique engagement by group. I'm just trying to figure out how to create a similar engagement before we can even get there and start to differentiate for specific needs. Mm-hmm.
I really like what you said, Jennifer, about the old, Gallup, the old Q12 for those who remember it from First Break All the Rules. But I'd say that's where ours comes in. We experienced kind of a blip in our departures in our company. It was kind of shocking because at Nestle, people don't leave us. And when they started leaving us, we were kind of shocked, especially when we looked at the demographics of who was leaving. People less than 2 years with the company, high performance females, frontline leaders. And so we had an immediate reaction that this wasn't right, and we dug into it. And when we looked, we realized that despite all of our work on creating great performance management and development programs, managers weren't having the right conversations. So kind of relying on some of the Q12 terms, we kind of looked at 11 different dimensions that we found people really looked at in terms of whether or not this company was delivering on their needs, and we created a very simple engagement check-in. You can call it a stay interview. We probably all have similar versions of that, but it was a targeted conversation between a manager and employee where they used a very simple Excel tool to rank 11 different factors that were important to them, and they ranked them 1 through 11 and then asked, what was their satisfaction, how well were we delivering, and it was all set up where the employee filled this out and the manager then scheduled a meeting to talk through those. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you it made our managers very uncomfortable, and they're like, well, what do I do if they say they don't like what their pay is or their development? And I said, you listen to them. And it's amazing. You do not have to have the answers, but you just have to have that dialogue. And we did it with a targeted group last year of 622 targeted employees last year, and the retention was staggering. If I look at hypos and assets, this might not seem like a large number, but of those that didn't get the stay interviews, we had like a turnover, voluntary turnover of 4.4%. Of those that got the stay interviews, it was 1.4%. I mean, huge measure in that population.
Right.
Or in our factories, frontline leader, that's probably the toughest job in our company. And we have about 464 of those. And we did it with 222 employees. We did the stay interviews of our frontline leaders. Those that got the stay interviews, the turnover was 4%. Of those that didn't get the stay interviews, it was 48% voluntary turnover. So you can't put a price on a manager having sort of a vulnerable conversation with employees, and that's what generates engagement.
And how did you choose which candidates or which people you wanted to have the conversation with?
We made this tool available for managers to use with any employee they would like, and then we set a target to measure certain populations that we were experiencing losses. So for us, it was female managers, it was hypo assets, and it was frontline leaders. Separately, our engineering team picked it up and is doing it across all of their groups. So we didn't want this to be something we force that every manager has to do, because that's, how many people managers in here? Do you need more tools? We've tooled them to death.
Right.
And so we wanted to do something that plugged into our existing talent management system and just gave them something that forced them to have this conversation. And again, I said we did it with 622. Our target was to do it with a population that was 908. So we missed 300 people that were in our target audience. But I'd still say of the 622 that got them, I can measure dramatic impact. So it's been a good program.
Bethany, tell me a little bit about the programs at Boingo.
Well, first, I have to say, I am a Marcus Buckingham stalker. I hear he's presenting someplace.
I think we all are.
In line. I think that a lot of the principles that he talks about absolutely are core why somebody is engaged and why they stay at your company. So one of the things that I personally do, now remember, I'm 300 employees, not the enormous number you are. So I actually write to every employee on their 90th day, and I write to every hiring manager. And they get a series of questions that they answer. But they predominantly are related around the questions that I found from the 12 that you're referring to. And they are you building relationships? So are you making friends? And are you making connections with people? Do you have the tools you need to do your job? And it is often surprising to me the things that we'll get back. In one particular case, somebody wrote back and said, I really don't like to be called Kenneth. I like Kenny. And he says, but my nameplate says Kenneth, so everybody's calling me that. I got him a new nameplate that same day. But it's funny things like that that really make a difference to people. And then because it's 90 days in, the other thing I'm asking about is, one, do you have goals, and are you getting feedback? And they get an option on this survey to talk to me live or to just send it back, and I keep it confidential. They know that ahead of time. So the first time I sent it out, we're hiring about 10, 12 people a month. It's not a lot. The first time I sent it out, though, 2 people wrote back and said, I'd love to meet and talk. Now, in my HR heart, I was like, oh, they're not happy. Something's not going right. I was like, no, man. So, sure, come on down, let's talk. They get there, and boy, was I surprised. So this was a lessons learned thing. They just wanted to meet me. They're like, head of HR never reaches out and offers us an opportunity to meet. And I am so excited that you said, come out and meet with me. Now, that isn't true every single time, but I will say, since I have about 10 to 12 new hires every month, I always get at least one in the bunch who wants to meet. And occasionally, it is because they have some concerns that they're working through. But more times than not, I'm pleasantly surprised with the, hey, no, I just wanted to come down and say hi. And I do this again with managers at their 6-month mark.
So one of the themes that I think we've heard, there's 2 themes. One is tools. I want to come back to that in one second. But it also seems to be leadership buy-in. So what is the role of leaders in helping promote engagement? How do we make this not something that just the HR department gets stuck with and, hey, HR, go do this and come back when you're done?
Can I build back off my
Sure.
Sorry, let me just leap in on the top of you. So our CEO, one of his biggest things that he really makes a focus to do is to learn every name. And it's a lot when you're talking 300 people. So we have about 200 right here in Los Angeles. And he makes a point of, we use Bamboo HR. It has a very good app where you can actually see people's face and get their title and what department they're in really fast. So he spends a lot of time looking at that. And he meets, he has a luncheon every month with the new hires. And he walks through the strategy of the company. He talks about where we've been, where we're going to. It talks about the values they have with the people that we're hiring. And after each one of these, we send a survey. We are survey nuts. We believe in that two-way communication, and we love getting that feedback. So we send another survey out after that. Do you understand what we're trying to do as a company? Is there anything I, as a CEO, can do to make you feel more comfortable here? So we really, early on, our CEO sets that stage for the connection between our leaders and our employees, and it makes a huge difference to them. They feel like they're a part of the business, not just part of their little unit.
Other thoughts on the role of leadership in promoting engagement?
Well, it's kind of cliche, but they have to model the way. I can tell you that the 622 that we hit just on engagement check-ins, I can tell you the leader that was the first to do it, her entire division did it. I can tell you I kind of had to do it. The person that designed the program worked for me, and it was her project to build. And I can remember when I got it and I had my list of names of people I had to go do this with, I'm like, I don't want to do it with Maddie. She created this thing. But she was the first one I picked to do it with, and right out of the box. So I think at Nestle, we're really relationship-oriented, and although we're kind of a little bit stuffy and Swiss and seem really hierarchical, we're an extreme open-door policy. And so, I think you can go to anybody in that building, no matter what your title level, and engage with them. And it's a spirit of the entire company.
So another thing I'm picking up is scale. So it sounds like on the sub 1,000-person company, the thought is, as we go from a 10-person company where it's great to have everybody bring their dogs to 100-person to 1,000-person, what you're able to do changes. And it also sounds like from the perspective of a company that's over 5,000 people, the way you think about engagement programs and how do I scale it out across what could be a small city effectively changes. So I'm wondering if you can talk about scale from both those perspectives. One is how, on the smaller side, you're thinking about scale as you grow. And then, Jeremy, maybe we'll start with you. As the larger side, how do you think about something where the HR department is 150 people? And the programs are across 10,000 people. So even giving everybody a $50 credit to go out at night ends up to be a serious budget item.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we really try to level set whenever we set out in creating a program or launching anything is what are we trying to achieve here? Because ultimately, for those of you who've worked with international, like the rules are just always different, and they're always from, you have to go and get very creative to try to, if you wanted to send the gumball machine that everyone gets at their 5-year anniversary in Yahoo to Taiwan, now I've got to spend $400 in tax for that service award, right? So what am I trying to do here? Am I trying to make sure that every 5-year has a gumball machine, or am I trying to make sure that we're recognizing these milestones? So what we've tried to do is step back and actually get to the purpose and point. And allow for local discretion or for team level discretion. So this is where we do differentiate on the specific. And what this has done ultimately is allowed for leaders in different regions or of different teams to get the purpose and create their own version of it that works. And what I was talking about a little bit earlier in terms of activating our VP and director level, we have a very engaged senior layer that everyone sees. Every week we've got a all company-wide meeting, FYI, on Friday afternoons. And it's Marissa and it's the L2s, and they're all out there for the entire world to see. But the rest of the company almost becomes invisible. And those 13 people can't work across 10,000. And so what we've been working on, not only when we launch these programs, but just in any initiatives, is to really get that layer to understand purpose so that they can put in their own words, their own needs, their own culture, and deliver accordingly.
Cool. So, Tim, do you see similar scaling? You may not know the difficulties of scaling because that's always been your life.
No, I would say, but it goes back to, was it Kenneth or Kenny? What did he want to be called?
He wanted to be called Kenny.
What did that cost you?
About 10 seconds of my life.
Yeah, I think the biggest part of engagement, if you think about the time you felt most important, it wasn't because someone rolled in a keg or a ping pong table. It's because someone addressed you as a decent human being, acknowledged you, thanked you. So engagement is inexpensive. The cost of not doing it is expensive. So for us, and like the engagement check-ins, it was a 15-minute conversation managers could have. So for us, scalability is kind of in something that how fast can this replicate? And I'll tell you, those people that got engagement check-ins, they're not going to have to be trained in how to do that. They're naturally, when they become people leaders, are going to have that bias to do it. So for us, Nestle, we truly are this company that we move culture around the world by moving people. Things move not quickly through us, but when we get something right, we hope it can be picked up. So I don't think we measure any of our engagement programs and how much it costs or what the rollout or how do we scale it. It's really, ours are very low cost. We don't have a lot of food in the office. You'd think we would as a food company, but you know, it really is, it's more on the manager establishing rapport. I have to say on the other side, if I look at my last 2 years in this role, the times I've had to go into tough factories where we didn't have engagement, it wasn't because we weren't subsidizing meals or doing things. It was because I had a bad manager, or I had a leadership team that was so tied up because the operation was struggling that when the employees worked in every day, they weren't saying hi to them or acknowledging them. So, I mean, for me, it's kind of your original comments. It's about establishing that rapport, and it's between two people. And I don't, in this world we're getting in today, I mean, the number of times I see people standing in line, not acknowledging the person across from them that's serving them, it's something we got to get back to, that common courtesy. So we just try to live that every day.
What about operating at a different scale? Beth, do you have any thoughts? You're probably thinking about how do I think about engagement programs that can scale from 200 or 300 people up to 2,000 or 3,000 people?
Yeah, so I mean, moving from 190 to 300 is a big jump for us too. But I actually had in my notes too. It's not about money and it's not about food. So even though we all love the food. For us, the food is actually the excuse for the relationship building. So we create the opportunity for you to get to have a conversation with someone who's standing in front of you or behind you that you might not have normally. And it's a whole lot harder to say no to somebody that you actually now know. So you know, we purposely build opportunities for people to get to know each other. And that doesn't, I mean, it doesn't have to be food. We do a lot of the grassroots efforts that some of them already mentioned, where employees have come to us and said, hey, I want to start a book club. I said, great, let me buy the first book for you guys. You know, we had a tennis tournament. It's called Beat Pete. Pete was our CFO. He still is our CFO, and he's a fantastic tennis player, and they wanted to have a competition that ultimately ended in, could you beat Pete? Cost me absolutely nothing except my time, and we did it. And here's a place where the leadership is so important, and it won. Our CFO was willing to do it, and yes, he still won. And two, you have to make the time available and the opportunity available to the employees. So we did that in the middle of the day, and it happened over the course of a week because you go through rounds. So if your leadership team isn't behind this idea that these are important opportunities for people to connect with each other, then they're not going to have the chance to go. So you know, we do a lot of other things. We have most of the 100 people who are not in LA are actually in remote locations because of the military bases. So we have like 59 different remote locations. So we're constantly battling the what do you do about people who don't feel engaged with the headquarters office. And we try to do a lot that still engages them, from trivia contests to my favorite is the Oscar party this year. We did an acceptance speech. So you sent your video to us of you accepting the award, and we got a lot of participation from the field and a lot of great feedback on how much fun that was. We played bingo in by using Skype type technology. For anybody who was interested, we set up bingo games. They love anything that has a competition involved with it. So we find a lot of ways that don't cost us any money to run. Some that flop, but most that seem to go over fairly well.
So let's talk for a second about I think what's probably the modern poster child for the disengaged worker. And is everybody familiar with the open letter from the Yelp employee? It made some ripples. For those of you who aren't aware, there was a Yelp employee who wrote a blistering open letter to her CEO about her pay and about her position, and clearly a super disengaged person. That probably led to some PR kerfuffle inside of Yelp. But I'm curious as to, how should we think about screening for the right type of person who's going to be happy in their role, and also trying to identify disengagement so we can find ways to turn that around before it gets too bad. And Tim or Jeremy, any thoughts in your organizations? You probably have some of the more advanced analytics out there. How to either screen to make sure that we're setting people up for success or identifying problems before they get too bad?
I'd vote for the hat sorter, if we could. Harry Potter reference, sorry. I'll try it with a live audience next. Come on. So I think, all of us have probably some form of behavioral-based interviewing, and we definitely have motivational fits, because I'll tell you, Nestle's not, right for everybody. And so for us, it's a matter of, can we make sure we're asking the right motivational fit? We're not a company you're going to move 3 times in 1 year, to a new, you're going to spend a year in a role. And so it's good to make sure you're clear on that so you can give the right expectation. But, when I, not to take away from the question, but when I read that, I thought there's a lot more going on in that than just simply, would you screen for that? We were kind of talking about that example.
Let's bring it. We can go deep on this one.
That's a very engaged employee. But what's the behavior she's engaged in, and what's her shtick, what's the message she's trying to send? So I'm not to get in, inside her head, but there's a lot going on there. But the issues that person raised are real. Affordability. I know when I read it, I personally had an employee when I managed our training center, 27-year employee with Nestle, a company that I think is the best company in the world. And I was shocked one day to find out that he was going through the application process to get a Habitat home. And you kind of think, what this company's provided me and for my family, it's not easy out there. And so you kind of realize people have a lot of different challenges, and you might be providing, we were providing a great wage, what we thought was a living wage, but it's not easy out there to make it, even in Seattle versus let alone San Francisco.
Yeah, I also didn't sort of read it as a screening issue. I think it harkens back to what a lot has been said here today. If there were more conversations with her throughout, that she wouldn't have sort of gotten to this explosive moment where she needed to sort of lash out in that way. I was actually impressed with her engagement with the job as well, because it sounded like she'd really improved at it. She hadn't been giving away as many sort of free coupons and that sort of thing. She was getting much better at customer service. So the issue was more where this job was located and ultimately what they could afford to pay. And we all know that if you don't sort of take care of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, comp becomes a big part of an issue with engagement, right? But we also know that if you sort of overpay or start to use comp as engagement, that doesn't work either. But yeah, if she can't afford to eat, she's in a bad place, right? And so it was sad for me to read that and all that energy around it, although apparently she's got a successful stand-up comedy career going now. So good on her. But when it comes to screening employees, I don't think that energy could have been read in advance, honestly, because it does sound like she really wanted to make it work, and I don't know that there was something that we could, that a recruiter could have done to really predict anything like that.
Right. So let's zoom out a little bit from the employee to broader populations and issues of measurement. And this one's always interesting to me because we've talked about engagement in very much emotional terms, which I believe it is, but a number of us in this room likely, and myself included, believe that the ability to measure that emotion and track it over time is also important. And it feels a little bit incongruous. So can you talk a little bit about how you think about measurement of engagement? And Jen, why don't we start with you? And whether it can even be measured, is it worth the time? And specifically, how do you go about measuring engagement in your own organization?
Yeah, so we are one of those Coca-Cola types. We do our big annual YES survey, Yahoo Employee Engagement Survey. I used to call it YES when I wasn't in HR, and people got mad at me for that. Now I have to hold the brand. And it's the same thing. We get some interesting insights, but at the end of the day, employees see it as, we're going to give you some good ideas, and you're not going to listen to them. The survey, and so that's a bummer, I think. I think it causes some disengagement. A fascinating anecdote, it's a little tangential, but what we saw was, you all know that Yahoo's in an interesting place right now. We saw on our survey that our employees feel very connected to their managers, but disengaged from the company. There was a big disparity there. And so then that harken back to the question, well, if we get this manager piece right, we feel like that should sort of drive everything. And so thinking about that delta is something that we're sort of diving into right now, because there's obviously a lot of different layers of management, but that's something fascinating to us in terms of how are people having a great experience at the team level, but not at the company level. What I would love to do, just to like go completely in the opposite direction, is almost just have the airport smiley face survey, where when people just are walking out the door for the day, they just hit one of those buttons. And we just have a constant pulse on sort of what people are feeling. It would probably be more helpful. It would probably be like a presidential approval rating, and we'd be able to sort of react accordingly. We wouldn't know why per se, but we'd at least be able to sort of see it more frequently than the 12-month, with a lot of deep detail that ultimately, by the time you roll something out, it's either stale or it doesn't feel like it's really responsive.
I think you hit on it in terms of if you're not going to do anything with the data, don't ask. And for us, I think we had a couple cycles where we did that, and we really lacked a management tool to feed this in. And then we kind of realized a couple cycles in that we have this annual planning process. We call it our OMP, our Operational Master Plan. We actually plan 3 years. Almost every department does it, where we cascade priorities and people choose drivers and check for losses and build these. And when we finally just said, hey, we're not going to have a separate action planning to the survey, we're actually just going to use the survey data into our annual operating planning that each department does and each manager does, I think we kind of cracked the nut. So we let them pick the losses they want to focus on. We let them hold the focus groups to get at what's the root cause, and then they have to figure out measures that they're going to chase after. And we have like 6 questions on our survey that we do every 2 years, and like I said, 2 are about the emotional, 2 are about the rational, and 2 are about the motivational elements. The biggest thing we've found out is engagement isn't our problem. 83% of our employees report being engaged. Our problem is enablement. So it's kind of what you said about, do they have the tools they need to be successful? And so we found the scores there were like 69% across 6 different questions. So we really needed to stop worrying about engagement and start worrying about, are people, is decision making where it needs to be, or do they have access to the tools they need to be effective? And that's kind of where we took it. In the factories, we do it every 6 months. And we have only 16 questions we ask, but the final question, the first 15 are real simple. The 16th question is like this sort of emotionally laden statement about, I love Nestle, I love working here, I love our products, and I love my boss. And that's one of the answers. And the last answer on the other dichotomy is, I have nothing to say. And I'll tell you, I can track that score exactly to where we stand from an ER standpoint at all 23 of my factories. And I can tell you, I was just up in Bakersfield when I got the invitation to come here, working in a factory where we had a petition for a union. And I can go right to that score, right to the manager's department that score was on, and I tell you what, we had a manager issue, and a manager issue and his challenges at developing engagement. So, got to do something with the data.
Right.
Well, like I said earlier, we're huge fans of surveys. We use them for all types of different things, be it the monthly luncheon with the CEO or my 90-day, my 6-month. We do an annual one. We do one for benefits. We do them after all of our quarterly all hands. But we are very focused on, we don't ask you if we're not going to respond in some way. So we do a burning questions, so you get to send your questions ahead of time to our all hands meeting. We address all of them, some of them live, otherwise we do them in a written format. And we make changes based on what people have asked for, or we state why we're not going to. But the challenge with surveys also is that there are things that you're like, not going to happen. So an easy one, somebody wants Red Bull, you want iced tea, and we're not buying Red Bull for folks. I'm not peeling you off the scene, I'm sorry. But what we do is if we implement something, I just picked the drinks because it's an easy one, but we do it for things that are non-tangible as well. We actually have a brand that's called Brought to You by Your Annual Survey, or whatever the survey is, but brought to you by your 2016 survey is what we're using right now. And we literally put it on that bottle of iced tea for about 2 weeks so that you know, if you were the Red Bull person, that yeah, we didn't pick yours. But we still read it. We understood that people have requests, and there are some we're going to do and some we aren't, because otherwise they think, oh, you never read it, so why should I participate? And we have I mean, you would think we would have survey fatigue, but we actually have very high participation in our surveys. And we ask net promoter scores as well. We do the best places to work which we made ourselves onto the list last year, so we were very excited by that. So we're big fans of asking people things, but we are very cautious. We ask the tools question quite often. That every section that has a response, I have sent right back out to the team is relevant to, and they are required to take some kind of action. I say required, but the reality is it's not like I write to them and say, this is mandatory, you respond. They just do it, which makes it impactful.
So we're going to move to audience questions now, and I want you all to think about questions for the panel. I was even going to give them a chance, give you guys a chance to think about it. So why don't we start in the back? We're going to have a microphone being passed around here. And please direct your question either to individual panelists or to the group at large.
To the group at large. Last week, the Harvard Business Review published an article about women and minorities being penalized for promoting diversity. I'm the founder and chief compassion officer of Compassion at Santa Monica, and we're trying to build a more compassionate world. And part of our platform is building compassion and empathy in business. We're partnering with Happy City LA to do that, and we are using metrics about that. Can you tell us of anything that has to deal with empathy in your platforms? Are you using metrics or are you using programs to promote empathy and compassion?
We're not, so I'm not going to be a great person. I'm not specifically.
Also, an empathy or compassion, or else one of the questions we've heard, which I think is related to what the audience member is asking, is how do we think about diversity and how do we think about engagement across U.S. employees, foreign employees, and even the contingent workforce? And perhaps another way of asking about empathy across those.
I think the interesting thing about empathy is, I mentioned the word rapport earlier, and in a lot of our communication classes, we'll show how human bodies will show empathy in terms of how they establish rapport. So, most of you probably have courses in your organization around communication, but just videotaping people and showing their body language and showing how the body will naturally demonstrate empathy and almost how it mirrors somebody, putting yourself on the same level.
Am I doing it right?
Yeah. Well, let me see if
I'm trying to be open and hold my cards.
It's not being open, but if you see my stance is similar to yours, and you're going to naturally empathize with that. So I don't know where the hell I'm going with this, but I love I love the question.
They're coming with their next question.
There's a lot of teachable moments. When I videotape people and show them back, whether it's no matter what communication class, it's interesting to see when you have conflict or when you have that connection, that rapport being established, and we physically as human beings need to establish empathy. For us, the biggest thing around diversity is just really uncovering unconscious bias and bringing it, whether you use ladder of inference or whatever, but we've done some things that have been kind of uncomfortable for our organization in that we use a course, and there's a program out of the University of Washington that does, I don't know if you've seen it, the flashing faces, and it measures your unconscious bias. And I've gotten a lot of arguments with people because they're convinced that they are not biased. And I kind of start with, we're all biased, we're all conditioned, so get comfortable with it. But just kind of exposing that, and what we moved from was having these courses where we put them out there and expected everybody to take it to sheep dip, and we've kind of moved it into, well, where do we really care that unconscious bias happens? And it's really at decision making. So when we're doing talent assessments, I don't need to do a 4-hour class on unconscious bias, but boy, if I can put one slide at the start of a talent review where we're going to calibrate talent and just discuss about bias, that's probably a better place to put it. So I don't know if that got there.
I'm now adding that to my deck next week, so thanks.
Other questions?
Thank you. I want to follow up on Tim's comment. In most discussions of engagement, it ends up sounding like it's the issue with the employee. How do we get our employees more engaged? But the underlying question is, what are the things that are making people disengaged in organizations? And Tim alluded to it, but historically it's been the system that they're in has been the impediment to keeping employees engaged. They have to fight bureaucracy and related things like that. So I'd like to hear your thoughts about what you're discovering that are the non-relationship components of engagement that get in the way of people being engaged.
I'll start it because that's where we come up with enablement, because we found the same thing. We found ourselves blushing when we were reporting employees' lack of engagement, and we had to own the fact that there was a cause of that. And when we went to the enablement questions, we found out it was exactly that. And they told us things that weren't relationship based. It was, you don't push decision making down, you don't empower us, our tools are terrible, I can't be on a conference call in a room, I mean, our technology is slow. I have to go home to connect to the internet to download a file from my marketing partner because our systems don't have bandwidth to do it. So they told us things that were like, wow, you know, it's amazing what they had to do. So I think it was a matter of a lot of it on tools and systems, and then just a lot of it about the stuff that gets in the way. They had a lot of, we're a very matrixed organization. I mean, our employees tell us, we don't think we're organized for success. We're not efficient. And so, you know, it was, the enablement gets at the fact that what's a lever that possibly is causing a lack of engagement. And if you start up there, these scores will go up.
And Bethany, it sounds like your organization also, you're using surveys to really diagnose where are those problem areas to go after versus using surveys to figure out what's wrong with our employees. And that's a philosophical shift, right? And it sounds like the theme that's gone across everybody is you can ask the questions and you can diagnose the problems, but if you're not willing to take the action, then almost don't even start.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, we wouldn't, when we take a look, our questions are not the same every time we do a survey. So we are constantly reviewing our survey and making sure if we're getting responses to this, are we going to be prepared to address them, and or to make a statement on why, why we're not. But it begs the question of why are you asking the question if you're not willing to make a change in the first place?
Other questions for our audience in the back?
I'm the one in the back. Hi, I'm Jody. I work at a tech startup right here in Los Angeles. I'm going to leave my question a little open-ended. I'm hoping that you can address the topic of employee engagement and working remotely and how you feel about that. I know it can go in a lot of different directions.
And just to be clear, it's employee engagement and remote workers, correct?
So for employees who either want or need to work remotely, how do you keep them engaged? Do you think they can be engaged? And how do you measure that engagement if they're not there in person?
I think Yahoo might be relevant to speak on this subject. So it's interesting, right? So when Marissa came in, she found a company where there was a lot of lack of control. It was this zany internet company that at the time was 16 years old, 17 years old, and didn't have a lot of constraints. And so that's okay, right? That can be a really wonderful thing. But when she looked around, she was seeing a lot of abuse of that system. And as a result, one of the first decisions that was made from an HR policy perspective was that we were going to get rid of work from home, meaning remote workers, not meaning that if I need to work from home because I've got the cable guy coming or whatever, that flexibility still exists, very much exists. So I want to set that record straight. But can you engage when you've got folks all over the place? The hypothesis that we took in that moment was no. And I'm not sure that we feel exactly the same way at this moment. Where we were at that moment was we needed to get everyone together to figure out what the heck we were doing. And so the idea was, how do you have an engineer who's sitting by themselves in the middle of Eastern Washington working with this team in India? They're just not operating together. And so it was important for us to bring our teams physically together to get on the same page. Now, what's interesting, when I think of remote engagement, I think about how we deal with our international footprint, which still involves people who sit in offices with other Yahoos, but they still feel very different and distant, right? And so it's hard. It's really hard. And I think that goes back, I'm a strategy guy, so I believe that if people in the field can articulate what their mission is, understand it, and can connect it back, and they have the visibility and the connection to the company, which comes from leaders going and visiting, it comes from bringing them back as well, and keeping that open, that you can achieve in that. But you have to be really committed to it. And so I think what we've done is we've shrunk our footprint, and we've been much more intentional about making sure our leaders go out to the region and spend time with those teams, making sure those teams understand their place in the larger sort of tapestry of what we're working on. Before it was just almost, I mean, we really were in a lot of ways a conglomerate and a bunch of add-ons that had never really fully been integrated. And so that was part of what Marissa really had to clean up. And so our very popular policy, I think, gets sort of mislabeled on this, but ultimately, it's hard. It really is very hard to engage people that aren't physically together. And I feel it as one of the only people, we have a lot of recruiters down in Los Angeles, but we don't have anyone from traditional HR down here. And I feel a very different level of engagement when I go up to Sunnyvale for the day than when I'm here, just because I'm able to physically be with the team. And so we see that, and we know that it's important to bring people together with some regularity. And so travel's part of it. Video conferencing, we've invested a lot in technology to make people physically present to one another, but time zones can never solve for that. And so it's just something that you really have to consciously, really actively work at.
I was a year in my job before I met my whole team face to face. Just my direct reports. I have 94 people across the U.S., but just my immediate direct reports, I was a year in the job. I personally live in Seattle. I commute down here for work. So, I mean, I think, the world, we have 5 campuses, main campuses in the U.S. So home office, I mean, you got to find some way to establish the relationship. It's not easy to do, but technology is getting better.
More questions? So here in the middle.
Hi, my name is Courtney. I'm from Lionsgate. This is kind of related to the remote workers, and it was really, Jeremy, you were talking, sorry, not to put you on the spot, it's actually for everybody, but you were specifically talking about local discretion, and I believe you were using the gumball example, and with offices in different locations, and we obviously want to focus on our teams and provide them what's custom and what's needed for that specific team. But how do you address the problem of jealousy, or, well, this team got gumballs, but that team got plaques, and I want a $50 gift card? So how do you address different locations, different teams that need different things, but then see each other as competing?
And Kenny just wants a name tag. That's right.
Kenny just wants his.
Kenny's the easiest.
I think if local offices feel like that empowerment and discretion is truly there, some of that goes away. Some of it, right? So every week when we have this weekly meeting, FYI, up in Sunnyvale, they give out these awesome prizes for the people that are there. And we're always so damn jealous, right? And that just kind of sucks. We haven't solved that. But I think, when I think about our Dublin office versus our London office, our Dublin office has this very rich community vibe to it. And part of it's where it's located and the different commutes. You've got London, folks are commuting several hours by train, and there's just this sort of disconnect. But what we've been doing very much so is focusing with London leadership on showing them sort of how Dublin's connected as a community and having them think differently about how their culture is different. And so they're not going to be able to use the same magic sauce to get that connection, but what do they need to do locally? Is it a Thursday night where they just say, okay, at 4 p.m. everyone goes and does something because all these folks have tremendous commutes and it's just going to be difficult? What is the local version of this to drive the same level of engagement? So the jealousy, I'm subject to, I feel very jealous of those prizes in Sunnyvale, so it hasn't been solved. But I do think that if people truly believe their local teams have the ability to make their own version, instead of trying to just replicate and export culture, it's much more effective.
In back.
Hi, my name is Dan Kim. I run a company called Veritable Screening. We're a background check company. So we live in the front end of the whole funnel in terms of employment. And I feel like most of the discussion today has been about existing employees. And Darren, you did kind of mention the whole screening process. I'm wondering what you guys do as an organization to make sure you're kind of bringing in the right folks who can be right for engagement, whether it's certain interview training or assessment tests or whatever it may be. So, whoa, excuse me.
Well, I'll take a quick stab at it. So we're actually just starting. So we've been a little more seat of the pants when it comes to trying to hire for culture or cultural fit. But our CEO is a big fan of what he calls the science of hiring. So we've been very focused in the past year of narrowing down. There are a lot of things that make people successful at our company, but at the heart of it, what are the absolute top success factors for people that we're hiring in, or that we're people who are currently successful in our company, and how do we screen against it? So we're literally in the process right now of rolling this out using, speaking of tools, we're getting ready to use Greenhouse. We're just moving away from JobVite. And I think they have a pretty nifty tool for helping with this process. So we came up with our own content, but they're using them as the tool. And I can't tell you that we have great results from it yet because it's just coming out, but it was a great process to go through. We've been using it on a guinea pig basis for about a month and a half, and certainly our hiring managers and the people participating in it are loving the fact that they have, we've narrowed this down to one page, it's 3 major categories. We give you, here's the thing that we believe strongly in, so let's say it's innovation, and then what are the types of things that innovation means, and then what are your questions, and how do you interpret some of the answers? And they're samples. People are supposed to take them and create their own, but it gives them a starting point for it. So in a year's time, I'll come back and tell you how successful it's been for us, but we're excited about how it's rolling out right now.
We've tried instruments like predictive index and other pre-employment testing and have gotten away from all of it. I hope there are lawyers in the room, they can record that. No. But no, we've struggled with the stuff that's like assessment based, just in terms of really being comfortable with the validity. It's really been a challenge, and it's almost impossible if you ever find yourself in a suit trying to defend it. So we really avoid those, but we're just basic behavioral-based interview questions. I mean, we've used DDI and we've switched to PDI, so we've used both with very similar outcomes. Pretty traditional there.
Another question in the back.
Hi, I'm Abby. I actually am the manager of employee experience and culture at a fast-growing fintech startup in San Diego. And so my question is specifically for Jennifer and Bethany, but certainly everyone feel free to chime in. But I'm looking to know if you guys have experienced any kind of engagement growing pains as you've grown. We tripled in a year. We went from 200 to 600. So I'm curious to know if you guys have encountered any growing pains as you experience dramatic growth, and sort of how you address that.
Probably a slightly more unique version of this is we outgrew the space we were in right about the same time we started going through that huge growth. So we moved, thankfully, within our own building, but we moved to brand new space. We gutted it, rebuilt it, moved from 1 floor to 2 floors. So I think a little bit of some of that clash that comes with it got mitigated because we had this fantastic new space. It kind of reset everybody that was there. So I wish I could say I had solutions, but that moving's a good idea. In fact, if you move to LA, I know somebody who has a job opening. But you're always going to struggle with it, and then it's really going to be on you to have the opportunities for people to build relationships, because it goes back to that real hard to say no and not share and not be part of a team when you know the people that you're interacting with. So there've got to be lots of opportunities for them to get to know each other, in my opinion.
I think we have time for 2 more questions. Is that right? Okay, 2 more questions. We have the mic coming right to you.
Hi, my name is Mario, and I was wondering if any of you have established mentoring programs, and if you've had good results, and if you've developed any innovative twist to your program that you'd like to share.
I think we're on number 19, program number 19. No, it's something that comes up every couple years. It gets introduced, and quite honestly, it tails off. So I don't mean to be anti-mentoring, but we've had a trouble sustaining it when we forced the match, and so I'm a big proponent of encouraging people to take responsibility for establishing those mentoring relationships themselves. And we do have a pilot going on right now doing mentoring in our sales group, and another one that's a diversity pilot. But I got to say, we seem to sort of rehash the same program materials, the same onboarding of the mentors, the same selection of the talent, and I just think it's something that's better just to encourage a culture where people establish that relationship on their own. I don't want to sound negative on it, but that's where we're at.
That question gets asked in these panels, and usually the response is, so it's a very common response across the board.
Yeah, no secret sauce to getting mentorship to stick. Not that we've found. We have a few different programs for new college grads, for engineers, designers, and product managers, and build mentorship into that program to sort of build good habits. So as we've been talking about a little bit before, if you have managers who've given these conversations on a regular basis, those ICs then go on to become managers who incorporate that into their management style. And so we are seeing now that some of these folks have graduated from that and have teams that they've taken mentorship as part of that. So the seeds were planted, and that helps institutionalize it. We also launched a development program within HR this January, a rotational program. We hadn't had one for a few years. And mentorship's a key part of that as well. Again, just to sort of hope that with building that into the repetition for these folks, that when they go on to lead teams, whether at Yahoo or elsewhere, that mentorship will be part of what they push with their teams.
We don't have a formal mentorship program, and I will say, having been in one of the programs where you're the mentor, it was incredibly, to me, forced. And while I did the process, and the lovely lady that I was partnered with, and I hope she got a lot out of it herself, but I was just, every month I was like, oh God, here it comes again. We've got to get my figure it out. It didn't really flow for me. But instead, another one of our grassroots things that's happening, has been about 7 or 8 months, is I had a young woman come to me and say, hey, I'm going to do a Women at Boingo group, and every month we're going to do something. And her goal was to have the opportunity to talk to the women within our organization as a support group, some place to turn to when they had questions, and with the opportunity to basically whatever's on their agenda. So I think what she's ended up doing is and I take zero credit for this, she has ended up taking what we traditionally think of as a one-on-one mentoring process, and she's turned it into a group focus, and I'm involved in it. We've got our head of marketing, who's a woman who's involved in it. We participate. It's not like I'm any different than anybody else in the group. We all participate in the activities if it's of interest to us. That time we had a Toastmasters person come and talk to us. There's been a lot of attention for that. And then we've had just get together for wine and cheese. And again, it's only been about 7 or 8 months, but they love it. And there's a different thing that we're doing each month. So at least for us, that seems to be an approach that's working better.
Last question of the night.
She decided, then I get it. Good evening, I'm David Anderson. I am brand new in my position, not even a week. And like some previous speakers, I can relate a little bit more to Jennifer and Bethany as opposed to the large worldwide 100-year-old companies. My questions are twofold. How many employees do each of you have in your HR team? Because they're comparable in size to what my organization is. And do you utilize outside organizations or individuals to determine your employee engagement scores, and how often do you do that?
No shocker. We also have facilities in our group, and receptionists and the whole thing. So we're 8 people total. So for 300, and we're actually hiring our 11th director of training and development, which is, to me, a little surprising in a small company, and I'm super excited. Don't get me wrong, I'm thrilled, but I was surprised that we were going to be open to that. And we use the best places to work survey. So in terms of outside, we do participate with them. It's been fantastic for setting baselines when I first started. And like I said, we managed to get on, I didn't say we were at the top, but we managed to get onto the list last year. But we mostly use companies for research purposes. So Bolton, who's here, is our insurance broker. So we do our own internal survey, but they help us with everything from finding software, so technology to help us with benefits, to coming back with stats on things. So if we're saying, hey, we're looking to do a company match on our 401k, how many small companies our size actually do that and on a what frequent basis. But we take advantage of any of the people we do business with to pump them for information. Bolton, close your ears. But in terms of outsourcing the engagement surveys, no, we use SurveyMonkey. We created ourselves.
Great. Well, please join me in thanking our panelists tonight for a great discussion. So, final housekeeping items. There's a few. Please fill out your surveys. They are really important to us. Surveys matter. Metrics matter. We're not going to do anything with the information. We just want to know.
I'm calling Kenny.
Two other pieces. One, our host tonight is Cross Campus. A lot of you asked about the building. It's a great co-location facility or co-working facility that's about more than a facility. It's really about a community. So great folks. Thank you very much to our hosts. And finally, this is an HR event. So the bar is going to be open for another 45 minutes or so. I welcome you. Stick around. Let's continue the conversation. If anybody wants to share stories about engagement, other topics, tools you use, tools you don't use, this is the forum to have it. So again, thank you for the first ever LA HR Innovators, and looking forward to seeing you guys again. Thank you.